The winds of Beit al-Maqdis carried with them a silence so heavy that even the leaves on the trees seemed reluctant to rustle, as if they too respected the grief that weighed on one man's heart. His name was Zachariah, and every step he took inside the sacred sanctuary felt like a quiet prayer, an unspoken yearning buried deeper than his voice could reach. His beard had long turned white, his bones frail, his body aged, but his soul refused to give up, and each night as the temple emptied and the candles flickered low, he would slip into the shadows, raise his trembling hands, and speak to the one who had never ignored him. He had been patient not for months or years, but for what seemed like an eternity. The silence of the heavens never discouraged him. Instead, it made him whisper softer, as if believing that Allah was listening more closely to every tear that touched the floor. He had watched children grow around him, fathers hugging their sons, mothers rejoicing at every new birth. He had delivered blessings for other families and carried good news to homes filled with laughter. But in his own home, there was only one voice, his own, echoing through the halls of longing. At night he would look at his wife, the kind soul who had stood by him through everything, and though her eyes sparkled with love, they also carried the sadness of empty arms. She never once complained, and that made it harder for him. She smiled through her heartbreak, but Zachariah knew her heart begged for the same thing his did. But it was not for himself that he asked. No, it was not the selfish wish of an old man desperate for legacy. It was for the truth he saw dying around him. The Bani Israel had fallen into darkness, their leaders corrupted, their youth misguided, the Torah read but not felt, and he feared that if he died now, if his wife closed her eyes tomorrow, there would be no one left to carry the torch of sincerity. He feared that no one would speak the truth after him, that the light would fade, and so he prayed for a child, not for pride, but to protect the truth, to keep the divine fire alive. One evening, after a long day serving in the temple, he returned to the inner sanctum where Maryam had been given her place of worship. She was young, but her ibadah was like that of the angels. When he entered, he paused, his heart soft. She was surrounded by a light, not from the candles, but from her submission. She sat quietly reading, and beside her were fruits he had not seen. In that season, he looked at her puzzled and asked, "Where did this come from?" She looked up and answered simply, "From Allah. He provides for whom he wills, without measure." That one sentence shattered something inside him, not with pain, but with a sudden, fierce hope. It was as if Allah had sent that exact moment for him. His legs trembled, his heart raced. He stepped back into the hallway alone, and for the first time in years his tears fell faster than his breath. "Oh, my Lord," he whispered, "I am old, my bones are weak, my hair is gray, and my wife is barren, but you have never disappointed me. I do not ask for power or praise. I ask you for a pure child, one who will carry your name with truth and love, one who will inherit from me and from the house of Jacob, one who will please you in every step." His words were not loud. They did not shake the walls or call attention, but in the heavens they were louder than thunder. And before the night turned to morning, before even the stars blinked out, Allah sent his answer, "O Zachariah, we give you glad tidings of a son whose name will be Yahya. Never before has anyone had this name." He froze. The air around him stood still. The world felt distant. He looked around, wondering if he had imagined it. But no. His heart had felt it too deep to doubt. This was not a dream. This was mercy, and mercy never lies. His Hands covered his face, and he fell to the ground, whispering praise, his heart pounding with awe. But how he whispered, "How will I have a son when I am old, and my wife has always been barren?" The reply came not in anger, but in gentle certainty. "Thus has your Lord said, it is easy for me." That night Zachariah wept like a child, not out of pain, but out of love. His prayers had not been ignored. They had been stored, preserved in the heavens, like drops of rain, waiting for the right moment to fall. But the miracle was not just in the birth. It was in the soul of the boy. Yahya was no ordinary child. He was born with wisdom. He spoke to people with kindness and strength. He was not attracted to power or wealth. He preferred silence, reflection, and truth. His eyes carried the light of sincerity, and his voice carried the weight of prophecy. He stood among the people and reminded them of purity, of taqwa, of the love of Allah. He did not shout, but when he spoke, hearts trembled. He did not punish, but when he warned, even the arrogant felt shame. He dressed simply, lived simply, ate little, but gave endless. Liza Carey would watch him sometimes from a distance, a smile on his aged face, knowing that the boy was everything he had prayed for and hunned more. But not everyone celebrated Yahya's rise. The court of the king grew restless. His advisers feared Yahya's influence, his truth disturbed their falsehood. His presence challenged their corruption. So the palace began whispering about him. In the final moments of this part, the temple lights flickered low again, but this time it was not Zachariah weeping in the shadows. It was his enemies plotting in them, and the boy, the miracle boy, who once was only a tearful prayer, was now standing in the path of danger. Would the same God who answered his father's cries protect the child born from them? That question hung silently in the air. As the night deepened, the moon hovered quietly over the hills of Bait al-Maqdis, casting a silvery glow on the streets below, where whispers had begun to replace prayers. Behind the palace walls, men in silken robes bent their heads, closed voices low. Eyes wary, they spoke not of guidance, not of truth, but of control, of fear, of a man too pure for their comfort. Yahya's presence had stirred something ancient in the hearts of the people, a hunger for righteousness and a remembrance of Allah, and that terrified those whose power rested on the forgetfulness of the masses. He was young, but when he walked among the people, their gazes followed, not because of wealth or beauty, but because of the weight of his words. He spoke softly, yet his voice struck like lightning, reminding them of divine justice, of humility, of the fate of nations that once mocked the message of Allah and were now dust beneath the earth. He refused gifts from the wealthy. He refused invitations to the courts of sin. He refused to remain silent when injustice danced proudly in the open. He would look kings in the eye and speak as if they were nothing more than men, and he looked at beggars as if they were kings of sincerity. One day, a messenger from the palace arrived. Dressed in red with gold trim, he approached Yahya with a message from the king himself, an invitation to dine at the palace. Among nobles, advisors, generals, and scholars, it was the kind of invitation men killed for. But Yahya looked at the parchment and simply returned it to the messenger. "Tell your king, I eat only what Allah provides and sit only where truth is honored." The rejection spread like wildfire through the court. The king tried to laugh it off, but deep inside his pride bled. He who could summon armies had been refused by a boy with nothing but dust on his feet. But the true spark that ignited the king's rage came not from Yahya's words, but from his silence. The king had taken an unlawful woman into his palace, intending to marry her despite her being forbidden to him. The scholars around him feared his wrath and gave silent approval, but when the matter reached Yahya, he did not scream or curse. He simply said, "It is not halal for you to marry her." That one sentence turned the heavens above the palace cold. Woman with eyes like poison coiled her anger into the king's heart. Day after day, she whispered, "Yahya is turning the people against you. Yahya is mocking your rule. Yahya is dividing your court." The king, once torn in hesitation, began to tilt into hatred. His nights became restless. His throne began to feel heavier, and the one name he tried to forget echoed louder. Yahya, Karia watched all this unfold with a heart tightened. In worry, he saw the pressure mounting around his son, but Yahya never flinched even when threats arrived at his door, even when false accusations were whispered in the alleys. He continued his call to truth and purity. One night, as the city slept, Yahya stood beneath the stars, his hands raised in the same dua his father once made, his voice low and full of yearning. "O Allah, protect my heart from fear. Let not your truth be hidden by my silence. And if my death pleases you more than my breath, then take me only when you are most pleased." That prayer rose high above the clouds, even as men below sharpened their blades. The next morning, soldiers came to the sanctuary, not with respect, but with command. They approached Yahya with cold stares. "You are summoned by the king," they said. He nodded, without resistance, his eyes calm, his shoulders light. He followed them through the city streets, past those who loved him, past those who feared him, past those who now wondered if they would ever hear his voice again in the palace. The air was thick with perfume and tension. The king sat on his throne, his face pale and uncertain. Beside him stood the woman whose rage had not cooled. Her eyes glittered with hunger. The courtiers remained silent. None dared to challenge the scene that was unfolding. Yahya stood before them with no fear, his eyes scanning the room, not for safety, but for truth. The king looked at him and tried to speak, but his voice broke, and the woman leaned in, whispering something that made him nod slowly. The guards moved forward, their hands on their weapons, and in that moment time seemed to freeze. Yahya looked to the sky and whispered one last time, "O Allah, do not let my blood go wasted. Make it a witness for your truth. Let it water the hearts of the believers. Let it rise on the day when all secrets are revealed." And with a silent nod, the king gave the order. The blade fell quickly. The room echoed with silence, and in that silence the throne began to tremble. Courtiers tried to look away, but their hearts felt something shift. The woman smiled, but her victory was hollow, and the king lowered his head, unable to face the blood on his hands. But outside the palace, something else happened. The sky darkened, though the sun had not yet set. A sudden wind rushed through the streets, lifting dust and leaves as if the world had lost someone precious. Those who had mocked Yahya now walked quietly. Those who had feared him now wept. Those who had loved him now stood still. Zechariah heard the news not through speech, but through silence, the kind of silence that follows a wound too deep to explain. He did not scream or fall. He simply walked to the place his son last prayed, placed his hand on the floor, and whispered, "May Allah join us soon." But this was not the end, for when Allah takes a life in truth, He raises it higher than life itself. Yahya's blood did not sink into the ground and vanish. It rose with the angels. It soaked into the land and awakened hearts. For generations to come, It remained a symbol, a banner of sacrifice for truth, and in time the name Yahya would be spoken with tears, with awe, with love, his memory not forgotten, but carved into the heavens. Yet, for Zachariah, there was one more trial. Ahead, one final fire that would test the man who once cried every night for a son. He did not yet know that his name, too, would be written with blood. The death of Yahya did not silence the truth. It echoed louder than ever before it moved through the alleys and homes of Bani Israel. Like a wave of grief that refused to settle, the air felt heavier, prayers sounded softer, and hearts beat slower, as if mourning had draped itself over the city forever. No one dared to speak his name with anything but reverence. No one who had heard his voice could forget it, and no one who had witnessed his execution could sleep without guilt. But for Zachariah, the world had changed entirely. He still walked to the temple each morning, but his legs no longer moved with strength. They dragged as if burdened by something eternal. He no longer smiled. Though he did not cry outwardly, the sorrow had soaked into his bones. The walls of Beit al-Maqdis echoed with his silence, the same silence that once comforted him now mocked him with memories. He stood often in the same place where Yahya would pray, where he had once taught children and reminded the people to love Allah. He would sit quietly, fingers tracing the lines of the Torah, not to read them, but to remember his son's voice reciting them slowly, like honey dripping from the heavens. The people feared for Zachariah's health, but they did not know that his strength was not his body. It was his soul, and that soul was now walking toward something he had already accepted. But while grief crushed him on one side, something else began to rise on the other. The enemies of truth, those who had schemed against Yahya, felt emboldened. With him gone, they now targeted those who remained faithful. They mocked the old man. They whispered that Zachariah's Lord had abandoned him. They laughed that no revelation had come to him since his son's death. But Zachariah did not respond. He did not defend himself. He did not retaliate. He simply returned to the temple every day, continued to whisper to Allah, continued to ask for protection, not for himself, but for the message he had carried for years. One evening, as he left the temple, a small boy approached him holding a piece of stale bread. The boy offered it without speaking. Zachariah took it, gently touched the boy's head, and whispered, "May Allah protect you and all who carry the truth, even if the world turns against you." That night Zachariah did not sleep. Instead, he stood again in the silence he knew so well. He raised his hands just as he had years ago, but this time his prayer was different. "Oh, I am weak. I am alone. I have no heir. My son is returned to you, and I am only a flicker in this world, but you are the light that never fades. If my end is near, then let me die with your name on my lips. But if my message is not complete, then give me strength, not for me, but for you. Ya Rab, protect the truth, even if you erase me for it." In that stillness, Allah answered, not with words, but with signs. One of the faithful came running to him the next morning, face pale, voice shaking. "They are searching for you," he said. "They say you still speak the truth, and that you must be silenced. They are coming." Zachariah, old prophet, looked at him, smiled gently, and nodded. He did not panic. He did not run. Instead, he walked into the sanctuary, entered the inner chamber, where none but the righteous were allowed, and prostrated when the soldiers arrived. They searched the city. They broke into homes. They questioned everyone, but none had seen him. None dared speak. Then they turned to the temple and forced open its doors inside. they found nothing but quiet and light, and the smell of old books and olive oil. But as they stepped deeper into the chamber, their eyes met something strange. In the far wall where Zachariah had last been seen, there was now only stone, smooth, clean, undisturbed. No door, no passage, just while Allah had answered his servant's final prayer and hidden him from the eyes of those who wished to harm him. It is said that he remained hidden there by the will of Allah, that his soul was taken gently and his body never desecrated. His enemies were left speechless, powerless. In their rage they struck the stone wall with swords and fire, but nothing responded, and slowly fear crept into their hearts. They had killed Yahya, they had hunted Zachariah, and still they could not extinguish the light. Generations passed, and people remembered Yahya as the child of miracles and martyrdom, and they remembered Zachariah as the man whose prayers shaped prophecy, who cried for years not for wealth but for a child who would serve Allah. And they remembered how both father and son stood against kings and corruption with only dua and truth. This story did not end with death. It ended with legacy. Zachariah had once whispered into the night when no one heard him, but Allah had not only heard, he had answered. He had given him Yahya, a boy pure than gold. He had protected him even in sorrow, and he had raised both father and son to ranks that no throne could ever match. And so this story remains etched in the hearts of the believers, not just as a tale of pain or miracles, but as a reminder that Allah sees every tear, feels every loss, and when the time is right, he returns what was lost in ways greater than ever imagined. This is what happens when a prophet cries for a century and Allah finally answers.